Justin A.W. Blair here. I'm a writer, I'm a painter. I also apparently have a YouTube channel now. I'm going to talk to you about The Siege, the second in a series of Deep Space Nine novels released by Pocket Books. This one, written by Peter David, and I believe came out in 1993. Now, you may have seen my review of Emissary, which is the first in this series. Emissary differs from The Siege in that Emissary was a novelization of the first episode of Deep Space Nine. It more or less went scene for scene following the show. The Siege is different. The Siege is obviously set in the Deep Space Nine Star Trek universe and conforms to all the guidelines, or most of them anyway, set forth in that universe, but it is a completely original idea, a completely new concept. So for those who really enjoy Deep Space Nine, these novels are kind of fun because you get an expansion of the things that are no longer available to you since the show has been finished for about 30 years. Unfortunately, this novel is one that I'm going to have to recommend that you skip if you're going back through and checking out some of these books. There's a wide variety of reasons, unfortunately not just one reason why you should, but let's talk about it a little bit. We'll get into a couple of specifics, and then I think this book is good to talk about a few broader themes in Star Trek, and what works and what doesn't. We find ourselves on the station, and in essence what this is a very early 90s, there's a psychopathic serial killer loose, we have to find them. That's fine, that can work. But what doesn't work in this book, first and foremost, is the characterization. I'll read you some quotes and I did not write down all the quotes from this, but we have Gul Dukat, which we all know as a character. Gul Dukat at one point uses phrases like, none of your damn business. That doesn't really land right for Gul Dukat. Gul Dukat only plays a relatively minor part in this book, but throughout we get this. We get the writer's voice coming through every single character. Since Odo is one of the main characters of this book, though, in The Siege, it's extraordinarily painfully obvious with Odo. Basically, Odo in this book is kind of a cross between, the 90s people will get these references, kind of a cross between Daria and a Beavis and Butthead character. Odo will just say whatever sometimes. I quote, whatever. Let's roll back for a second and talk about the actual prologue of this book, where the writer says, half jokingly, I'm sure, yeah, I decided to write this book because I wanted to buy a new car. Now, first off, as a writer in the year 2025, the idea of being able to knock out probably 50,000 word novel and buy a new car with it immediately enrages me, just from my own standpoint as a writer. Good for Peter David, though. I'm glad that worked out for writers in the 90s. This book deserves a Ford Escort. It reads fast, and so that's great, but not a great book. Back to characterization. Essentially, you have this kind of Gen X Odo, which is constantly just insulting people, sometimes violently. Doesn't really make sense. Odo is a curmudgeon. Curmudgeon. He's curmudgeonly. Odo is famously curmudgeonly. Instead, Odo is just kind of mildly angry at everybody, insulting to Sisko, insulting to a lot of the people around him. And you get that in the show a little bit. He doesn't particularly like Bashir. No one really likes Bashir. So that's a major problem, because the book is basically about Odo. The POV changes back and forth. We follow people around the station, but Odo and Bashir are the two main characters from Deep Space Nine that we're getting into. So, in short, what happens? There is a murderer on the station. And by the way, we know who the murderer is from the beginning. It's a gelatinous goo. Essentially the murderer is, though it's not ever stated exactly, the murderer is a psychopathic version of Odo. It's never said that he is one of his species, but he acts exactly the same way, physically changing his ability to move around and transform into objects and hide around and of course, escape through vents, because all aliens that are shapeshifters on Star Trek escape through vents. That's what they do. The murderer himself, we don't really... The murderers... God, this book. The motivation for the murderer is apparently he's just bored. Basically, when he's asked, why are you murdering everybody? He's kind of like, I'm bored, whatever. It's just this very nihilistic and strangely violent book. And this, let's move to the bigger theme here, because this book is almost not worth talking about the specifics of it. Star Trek doesn't really do that well with action scenes, and it doesn't do that well with violence. That's my opinion, and that ranges throughout the entire franchise. It's one of the problems with the franchise since, basically the end of Enterprise, and really you could say starting with Enterprise, which I just finished watching recently for the first time. It's basically just a bunch of bad action scenes. Watch for the videos for that, because that's not entirely true. There's some good aspects to it, but Star Trek doesn't do well with violence. And the violence in this book actually is way in excess of what you'd find on the television show. It borders on just gore. And again, there's a place for that in other franchises, I suppose. I did not enjoy it at all. It's just a shapeshifter, like turning into things and getting inside of people, making their heads explode. It's just not good. What actually happens here is a murderer is on the station. We see him start to murder people. He marks a number in blood above their bodies. I'm not entirely sure why, starting with 1. And no one can figure out who he is. But Odo kind of is trying to find out who he is. Then there's this other element, because there are 2 main characters in the novel, as I said, Odo and Bashir. So let's move to Bashir's kind of B plot. The wormhole is closed down in this book, because there's some subspace technobabble reason why the wormhole is shut down for a while. So we have all these people gathering in the docks and getting inside the station. One of these ships is from a religious leader from an alien civilization we don't hear a lot about in Star Trek. If any, I'm not sure we've ever heard about them. He dresses in a cloak and has glowing red eyes. He's somewhat polite, but holds himself in high regard and thinks that, anything he wants done should be done. Clashes with Cisco somewhat. He has a sick and ill son, but the son can be cured, and Bashir figures this out, and the Bashir wants to cure the kid. He finds out, of course, apparently these are like Christian Scientist aliens. They don't believe in medical care, so they refuse. Now, they refuse politely, and they say, hey, this is our religion, this is our culture. We do not believe in intervening medically. Please leave us alone. People say that Star Trek doesn't have a religious belief, but they do, and it's science. And you really see that here. Bashir basically says, I can cure your kid, so I want to do it. And he does something extraordinarily, really egregious. He basically tricks the mother of the kid into going into a holosuite to see a holosuite projection of what her son would look like on his deathbed, and then psychologically manipulates and kind of tortures her into accepting medical treatment, which, by the way, then doesn't end up happily ever after. The son does live, that's great and all, but then her husband basically walks around in a circle, and that's how he divorces her. He walks around in a circle and basically banishes her from the religion and divorces her, and then says peace out and heads off to the wormhole. In and of itself, we see conflicts like this in Star Trek a lot. How science clashes with religious belief and cultures, and sometimes it's done really well. This is done ham-handedly. Even the author, I think, writing those scenes stepped back and made Bashir think about maybe what he was doing was not right, because it's kind of grotesque the way it's all handled. Bashir is characterized correctly here as being somewhat arrogant and brash and young and making bad choices. He makes this choice that has some really bad ramifications, though, again, the kid, supposedly anyway, goes off and is healthier. So that's great. Trade-offs. Trade-offs. That, though, isn't really the main point. The main point of this whole novel is basically a series of chase scenes and action scenes and scenes of murder. Quote here from Odo, page 159. Crack your head like an oversized walnut. That's just not something that Odo would really say. We also just have bad action lines. At the end of the novel, Odo's chasing the bad blob alien. And the bad blob alien like barges through the wall of Keiko's room and just turns to her in the middle of a battle between him and Odo, which is also absurd. It's just a bunch of like jelly aliens fighting each other. They make hammers out of their legs and stuff. At one point, Odo turns his feet into roller skates or something and just roller skates around. It's extremely bad, but bad alien goo guy turns to Keiko in the middle of a battle and just says, "Nice station you have here." You know, goo guy transformer alien type things. My theory is that this was a direct result of the film Terminator 2 and the ability to do that particular CGI move, which was revolutionary when it came out in Terminator 2, of the gelatinous metallic transforming goo guy. DS9 did it well enough for the time with Odo, but using that as the basis for a action scene after action scene, and then putting just one-liner action lines in the mouths of this killer, which we don't even understand the motivation for, not good. Leave in the comments the following. Correct me, please. School me. Explain to me this. I could probably look it up. Maybe there would be a theory online for this. Page 152, I think it is. This is something we see, though, in Star Trek a lot. Someone needs to transport to some location very quickly. So you can transport a person from point A to point B, and point A does not have to be a transporter pad, right? You can lock onto a signal from somebody in some place in Deep Space Nine, say the quarters of someone. Say Sisko is doing this. So imagine Sisko's in his quarter. You can lock his quarters. You can lock onto him, and you can transport him somewhere to point B. At some point here, there's a rush for Sisko to go somewhere, and instead of just transporting himself there, calling the transporter room, transporting himself, he goes to the transporter room, point A, and steps on the transporter pad, and then gets transported to point B. Why is this? I don't understand. What is the point of the transporter pad? I don't really understand what the actual circle of light or whatever underneath the transporter pad does anymore, because you don't need to actually use that as a beginning or an ending location, as far as I can tell. Leave in the comments, explain to me, explain to others. Am I off base here? Am I off the transporter pad? The end of the book, we get big fight scene, like I said, and Odo's chasing the alien. What ends up happening is Odo lashes himself to a shuttlecraft or a runabout. The alien is about to escape. This whole scenario makes such little sense that I hesitate to even explain it to you. In fact, I'm not sure I will in detail. But in essence, again, we have this transporter thing, this transporter issue. They could essentially just lock on to Odo's body, transport, which, by the way, this is my mind is blown now that I think about this more. Odo apparently can't die. I mean, really. Like, he doesn't need to breathe, so he's out in the vacuum of space, which they say, oh, it's bad, he's in space, but it doesn't kill him, so it doesn't seem to matter. He's just riding on the hood of a runabout, which is heading towards the wormhole, and he can't die. Apparently, neither of these entities, these gelatinous entities, can actually die. They just get tired, and then they have to turn it into jelly. Anyway, again, you have this scenario at the end where the very simple solution would be just to transport Odo's. Just the shields come up on the station because Gul Dukat's out there being Gul Dukat, threatening people. The religious zealots have come with another ship. They're threatening the station. So the station puts the shields up, and you can't transport someone through shields. So then, okay, fine. Odo's out on the runabout. wrestling with the runabout and the guy, which is heading towards the wormhole. But since Odo, it doesn't matter if he's in space, they could just lock onto Odo's signature and just beam him into another part of space close to the station, but still outside the shields, and then blow up the ship. It doesn't make any sense at all. So these are small things, and the point isn't really necessarily to complain for the sake of complaining about a plot point. It's that a well-written book will move you through action scenes that aren't necessarily totally believable, or will at least make you think, oh, why didn't they do it this way? But a well-written book or a well-written show will just take you through that, and it'll land you in a place where you don't actually care to think through the fact that there was some kind of absurd point to what just happened. This book fails to do that. I wish I could tell you I recommended The Siege. Unless you are just a absolute Deep Space Nine completionist, you can safely skip this one. I want to talk a little bit more also, though, about this idea of violence in Star Trek and why it doesn't work. There's a lot of reasons it doesn't work. To me, Star Trek serves itself better, and viewers and readers in this case better, when it doesn't rely on violence. And the reason is there's obviously, since it was on television, there's a limit to what you can do there. So not only is there a limit to what you can do, because they're trying to keep it PG. And this book is not PG, actually. There's a lot of this kind of cringe sexual situations and really just gory violence. It's pointless. The other reason Star Trek doesn't do violence well, and should just simply shy away from it, and to a large degree should simply shy away from extended action scenes, slightly different point, is that there's something in writing called stakes. There have to be stakes set for a character. Now, most of television had a kind of hard limit on stakes, in the sense that you never expected a main character to get killed. That's a slightly separate issue with episodic, long series of things that didn't get solved until Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones made this point very, very forcefully by killing off one of the main characters at the end of the first season. So then, throughout the rest of the series, you thought, oh, there's a chance that a character is actually going to die. We don't believe that in Star Trek. You know, back in this time, that wouldn't have really ever happened. And there's reasons that it wouldn't happen, and that's fine. But that's one of the reasons that action sequences and potential violence doesn't really work that well on track, and never did. And that's not just this author's issue. That's an issue with several episodes from many of the different series. Yes, you can suspend disbelief, but when the episode relies upon something like this is essentially a thriller set in space. When the entire thing relies upon the fact that someone important might actually get killed, it doesn't work. You can mix those things into episodes that have other themes and other a different structure, so that you're not worried. You're not, no one's on the edge of their seat thinking Odo is actually going to get killed, right? So you just know, how is he not going to get killed, basically. I'd like to say something good about this book, but I simply can't find anything else to say besides it reads very quickly, so it's over relatively soon. That'll do it for this one. Check us out for the next episode. We'll be covering Bloodletting, which is number 3 in the Deep Space Nine series of novels.